I'm going to talk about the difference between therapy and coaching because I offer both, and I want to make it clear of the different types of ways that you can get support if you are working through childhood healing, childhood trauma, relationship issues, attachment issues, and all the other things that we can do in order to be better versions of ourselves. Welcome to Healing Childhood Trauma, the podcast for millennial women who are ready to heal from the past. Here, we have the deeper discussions on emotional well-being and practical tips that will empower you to transform your relationships and underlying anxiety from insecure to secure attachment. I'm Lysandra, your host and psychotherapist. I'm a little bit obsessed with human development, deep conversations, and finding the lesson even in the most challenging of circumstances. I'm very happy to have you with me on this journey of self-discovery where we unpack the past and heal in the present. At the moment, I have two different ways that I work with clients. I either work one-on-one, having individual therapy, or I have my program, which is more of a coaching style program. And so I will talk about the difference between the two. So I'll start with one-to-one therapy first of all. And so if you are somebody who's been thinking about having therapy for a while, but you're also quite reluctant, because let's face it, it is quite a daunting thing for you to find someone new, find someone that you feel will get you and you feel comfortable in. And it's especially if you're someone who's not used to talking about yourself, or you're just a very private person, which I can most definitely relate to. It's not an easy thing to put yourself out there and go through the process of therapy. Like it's hard, and the first step sometimes can be the hardest, of reaching out and putting yourself in what feels like a really vulnerable position, especially when you are just used to carrying on, getting things done by yourself and being very high functioning. So what happens in one-to-one therapy? And I'm going to have to talk about it based on how I work, just because there are different types of therapies and different therapists work in different ways, because that also depends on their training and their experience and just how clients are all different. You have your own individuality and your own experiences. That kind of works with therapists as well. Although they might be trained in a similar approach, each person is different. And the most important thing when it comes to therapy is, you'd be surprised, it's not that it's, how much training they've had or how long they've been qualified for or how many clients they've worked with, what they've studied, what they've trained in. To a certain extent, yes, those are all important factors. Being qualified is definitely way up there in importance of what you're looking for when you're looking for a therapist. But a lot of research has shown time and time again that it's not about the mode the therapists use. So it's not about whether they're person-centered, whether they're psychodynamic, whether they use EMDR, whether they use CBT. None of those things ultimately matter as much as the relationship that they're able to form with their clients. So it's actually quite important that you feel comfortable and safe with the therapist you're working with, because they can have all the bells and whistles in the world. If you're not feeling safe, or at least can see the potential to work with this person, you're not going to get very far with the outcome of your therapy. Therapy in the very traditional sense can be somewhat slow-paced, especially if you are just doing talking therapy, because it's almost like we can't force our way through the process. We can't start immediately talking about like our deepest, darkest traumas and unpacking all of that, because one, especially when it comes to working with trauma and trauma therapy, it's actually not useful for you to just unpack horrific traumas that you've experienced without knowing or having any tools for self-regulation, or knowing how to not overwhelm yourself with talking about really difficult experiences, or almost reenacting or re-traumatizing yourself in rehashing difficult experiences from the past. And it's quite similar to, imagine you're going on a first date. When you think about dating, you might not open with, how do you resolve conflict, and how many children do you want to have, and what are your weaknesses in relationships? You might not start with that on the first conversation you have within the first 5 minutes, because more than likely you're going to freak them out and they're going to be like, whoa, too much, too soon. And that's kind of like the process of therapy. Like, it's a relationship that needs to also happen organically and naturally. But what does happen in one-to-one therapy is you get an idea of what your current struggles are, and there's a bit of a loose plan that you probably come up with alongside your therapist. Because I am an integrative therapist, and that basically means that I've been trained in different ways of working with people. And so essentially it's having different tools to use depending on the client and client needs. But ultimately what that looks like is understanding how your past relationships and your past experiences might be impacting you in the present. And we do that just through general talking, and maybe I'll ask like specific types of questions that help to go deeper and to have more exploration. But essentially it's going to feel like it's a conversation. But where this differs from like a regular conversation that you might have like with one of your friends or with someone in a social setting, the conversation is going to be very focused on you. And it's very different, even though you might have like really good friends who are amazing listeners, who give you feedback, who are on your side. There is something that's very different about therapy that it's not the same thing as talking through with a friend. And I can tell you that with my whole chest because of my own experiences with I've got amazing friends who I can talk to, but it's not the same as therapy. You don't talk about things in the same way, and it's not a two-way kind of, oh yeah, this has happened to me too. Like, your therapist isn't really there to share their own experiences in that same kind of way, because they're not trying to relate with you on a level where it's like, yeah, I know what you mean. This is what happened to me and this is how I dealt with it. It's totally looking at it from your perspective. It's seeing it through your eyes and understanding it and unpacking it and totally being focused on you and looking at places where there's similarities, looking at places where you might have experienced that before, looking at the part that you're playing in it, and sometimes even offering gentle challenge when you're the person who is like the common denominator in certain situations. And where your friends can kind of check you if you're the one that's in the wrong. With therapy, it's like a different type of accountability. It's learning how to do that, not only within the therapeutic space, but also learning how to do that for yourself. It's not just about your therapist just being there to champion no matter what you're doing, no matter what you're saying, but it is looking at your growth and the things that will help you without having perhaps your own agenda. And I can definitely speak as somebody with my own personal experiences of just being there in a friendship capacity and not as a therapist capacity, and almost having my own agenda, especially like if a friend is talking about maybe their relationship. And I've been in this situation before where someone's talked about, you know, certain things that's happening where I'm close to not only my friend, but I'm also close to their spouse in a lot of ways. And so I'm invested in their relationship staying together. And that can definitely, even if you're unconscious about it, that can definitely influence the kind of support, the way that you try to offer support for your friend. A lot of people don't hold that consciousness because they're not also therapists, which for me is a bit of a blessing and also a bit of a curse. But that's a story for another day. I feel like I'm going on a tangent, so let me pull it back. The whole point of me explaining this is to say, like, what is the difference between one-to-one therapy and coaching, right? So when you have therapy, it is a lot slower paced because we're talking about things in a way that feels authentic. And, you know, the way that our brains work, we don't remember everything all at once, and it takes a while for us to process. We need time to be able to reflect on our experiences, and, we're not robots, so we're not going to go through, okay, trauma number 1, trauma number 2, trauma number 3. Like, it doesn't work like that. It's very organic and it's very relational, but it's very powerful work. But for some people, it can be maybe either too slow paced, or it might be too intense if you've never been in a therapeutic space before. So if it's your very first time having therapy and you're someone who doesn't talk about themselves often and you don't express emotions, you don't talk about how you feel, more than likely you are going to struggle. Now, that's not to say that you don't have one-to-one therapy, but it's just something to be aware of, that if it's something that you're not used to initially, it does feel hard. And it's something that you can overcome and get better with over time. But it's just something that you should be aware of if you've never had therapy before. And there's also the time and the financial aspect. Not everybody has the means to be able to have therapy for as long as perhaps they might need, just because therapy is expensive. It is something that you need to invest into, not only time-wise, but also financially. The reality is that not everybody has the means to be able to do that. Or sometimes what also happens is that people believe they don't have the means to be able to do that. And I'm not talking about people who are, struggling to make ends meet and literally living paycheck to paycheck. But I'm talking about sometimes the people who don't prioritize themselves, even though if they made maybe one or two or a few adjustments, they actually could invest in themselves. But it's more about how much they're willing to spend on themselves, because they might be really willing to spend a lot of money on their kids, or spend money on holidays, spend money on, just whatever helps them to just feel good, which, is not a bad thing at all. But sometimes if you're not used to investing on something that is solely just for you and solely for your well-being, it can feel like it's either overindulgent, or there can be a sense of not feeling like you're worthy of investing in yourself in that way. And that's definitely something that I've heard from clients in the past. So if you do have the means and you do have the time, and it's something that you are willing to trust the process of, then one-to-one therapy is a really good fit to do some deeper healing work that can really honestly be life-changing if you find the right fit for you. And so here's how coaching differs. Now, there is a lot of overlap with coaching and therapy for me, and I have to put a massive disclaimer that there isn't generally a big overlap between coaching and therapy. Generally, there's only an overlap because I'm already trained as a therapist, and I became a therapist first, and I've done a lot more extensive training in therapy than I have in coaching. And that's just simply because to train as a therapist, that takes years and years, and to train as a coach, you can pretty much do that in 3 to 6 months, and it's not as intensive or extensive, and there's not as much practical work that you have to do in order to be able to qualify. That doesn't mean that it's easy, but it just means it's just a different set of criteria, and it's not the same thing. So it's much easier to transfer your skills from being a therapist to a coach than from a coach to a therapist. Because if you're a therapist, you can kind of fast track your coaching training. Whereas if you are a coach, you'll still have to go through the years of training of therapy. It's not going to fast track anything for you because it's not as transferable as you might think it is. And so I have a coaching program, and in this program, it's very specific with the content that we're covering, and it's very focused and it's very practical. When you are going through coaching, you don't necessarily have to go as much in depth in terms of your childhood experiences and talking about how you process emotions and processing emotions in the moment. Therapy is a slower version, and you slow it down, and it's less proactive. But coaching is, and it's going to be a much better fit for you if you're not much into the talking about feelings, and you want something a bit more practical without necessarily having to hash out your specific experiences or specific traumas. And the thing is, you don't have to pick, to be honest with you. You don't have to pick one or the other. You can do a combination of both. Or you can start with one and then do something else. I definitely believe that there is so many different ways for you to heal, and it doesn't have to just involve therapy, one-to-one therapy, or it doesn't have to involve coaching. There's so many different ways that you can learn more about yourself and heal, because there is no one size that fits everybody. We are so different, and I truly believe that different things work for different people at different times. So quite often when I'm going to work with someone, I will do a bit of an intro call and see, what they would like to achieve, if they know what they would like to achieve, or if it's a case of seeing what would actually be the best fit for them. And sometimes the best fit for them isn't even to work with me. And I have no qualms about telling people that actually, I don't think therapy is the thing for you. I think that maybe you should look into whatever that thing might be. And it could be, reading, it could be podcasts like this one. It could be, so many different things. It could be like wellness spaces. It could be retreats. It could be, there's just so many different ways that we can heal. We don't have to just do it through the lens of westernized culture of therapy, sitting in a room, talking things through. Like, if that appeals to you, crack on. Absolutely amazing. I would love to work with you. But it's not necessarily how everybody wants to go through their healing journey, and how you go through your healing journey ultimately has to be up to you, and it has to feel like the right fit for you. So yes, while I think that everyone can benefit from therapy or benefit from coaching or something that is around self-work, self-development, self-healing, there isn't necessarily one way that I think is better than another. It just depends on the person and the situation. And I'm quite lucky where I pretty much love to do both things. I love to work one-to-one with people, and I also love the coaching aspect, because I also really like to work with people who are really like invested in showing up for themselves and doing the work and being active. And although I love my one-to-one work, I'm really loving the work that I do in my program as well, because there is that coaching element. One of the things that happens within my program is that there is also the community aspect. Where that differs from one-to-one therapy is that quite often, obviously because it's one-to-one therapy, it's just you and the therapist. Whatever the healing is going to be around what you need to overcome, it's going to be based on just the work between the two of you. And something that I heard a lot of my clients, my one-to-one clients, would talk about feeling really isolated in their healing journey, particularly when they're learning about like relationship traumas that they've been through, especially when that's come from family, and they're basically doing all of this self-work and all of this healing, but their family and their relationships don't fit with the work that they're doing. So they're doing all of this growth and healing, but the people around them are staying the same. And so that can make the journey of healing and learning more about yourself and unpacking just feel quite isolating and quite lonely if you're going through it on your own. And I would be seeing so many different clients who would be talking about pretty much the same thing, and really talking about like this feeling of isolation and feeling like lonely, and like people not getting them, and feeling as though like they don't have their people, they don't have their tribe. And I'd be like, oh, like you're so similar to this other client. Or I've got like 4 or 5 clients who are literally all talking about the same thing, and this horrible description of feeling isolation and feeling loneliness and empty and not having people to relate to or understand. And so that was why I ended up making my program, because if we're all working towards a similar thing and we're all experiencing it together, that there is so much more healing work that can be done in the community and in safe spaces that I just haven't been able to replicate with one-to-one therapy. And so that's why I opened up my offerings to offer both things, so that the people who were quite advanced in their journey and ready to take their healing out of just being one-to-one therapy, and were ready to put a lot of the things that they were learning into practice, which is what we do in my program, which is called Secure, which is essentially moving from insecure attachment to secure attachment. So it's for women who have either an anxious, avoidant, or disorganized attachment style and want to become more secure within themselves and within their relationships. Doing that in a group setting fast tracks your healing so much quicker than doing it one-to-one. And that was my experience of not only my work with clients, but also like my personal journey for healing as well. As a therapist, I find it really hard to find a therapist for me to work with, and so I've had so many different people that I've started to work with, and then the fit just hasn't been right, or the experience just hasn't, it's just not met. The therapy wasn't therapying, okay? It just didn't hit what it needed to hit. And the spaces where I did a lot more of my healing, because I have a certain level already of self-awareness, has been in community spaces and spaces where I find it very easy to talk in one-to-one therapy. What I struggle with are group settings, and so it was helping me to stretch in a different way. And what I got out of that experience was so much more enriching and more fulfilling than what I had with one-to-one therapy. And I thought, okay, I'm gonna do what I know works for me. And so that's why I have the two different offerings, the one-to-one therapy and the group therapy. And so if you are wondering which one to go for, most therapists, myself included, do like an introduction call. So even if it's not me you're thinking about working with, there's another therapist that you might have liked the sound of, or that you just feel like you've got a better connection to, or that you want to learn more about their style of working or what they kind of specialize in. It's always a good idea to have that introduction call and to see, can this person work with the issues that I want to work on? And just checking out and seeing if it's a good fit. Whoever you choose to work with, and whatever route you decide to go down, whether it's therapy or coaching, either way, it's always good to show discernment about who you're working with, because if you are also based in the UK, therapy and the world of coaching isn't very well regulated. In fact, it's not government regulated at all. And places where it is regulated are privately owned companies. And so that can potentially leave people vulnerable to seeing people who are not qualified enough, or who just don't have the right kind of training or the extensive amount of training that they need to have. And I'll probably make another episode about what to look for when you're looking for a therapist, but just be mindful of who you are working with. No matter who you've chosen, like, trust your judgment. And if something doesn't quite feel right, and if you don't feel comfortable enough to voice it, then it's okay to move on and find someone else, even when that person is me. Okay, thank you so much for listening and spending part of your day with me. And I will speak to you really, really soon. Take good care of yourself. Bye. Thank you for joining this episode of Healing Childhood Trauma. I hope you found today's discussion insightful and empowering. Remember, healing is a journey and you are not alone on this path. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, rate, and leave a review on your favourite podcast platform. And you can share this episode with a friend. Your feedback helps this podcast to reach more women who are ready to heal and build secure, healthy relationships and heal from the past.